I was 15, and I grew up in one of those small Midwestern towns where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. It was the kind of place where you could leave your bike unlocked on the sidewalk, and it would still be there when you got back. My house was only a few blocks from the little downtown area, and I'd often walk or ride my bike there at night to grab a soda or some candy from the gas station. I always felt completely safe. On this particular night, I was heading down there for a pack of cigarettes. I know, I was way too young to be smoking, but I thought it made me look cool. I bought my pack and started the walk home. The sun had set, and the streetlights were beginning to cast long, yellow pools of light on the pavement, but the darkness didn't bother me. It never had. That feeling of safety shattered in an instant. As I passed a cross street, a man stepped out of the deep shadows between two houses and fell into step behind me. At first, I wasn't scared, just aware of him. I could hear his footsteps on the pavement, a steady rhythm a little too close for comfort. I picked up my pace just a little bit, and I heard his footsteps speed up to match mine. Soon, he was only a few steps behind me. The back of my neck prickled. His voice, low and raspy, cut through the quiet night air. He asked if he could have a cigarette. I was raised to be polite, so even though every instinct was screaming at me, I stopped and gave him one. Then he asked for a light. I handed him my lighter, my hand trembling slightly as I watched him in the brief flare of the flame. He had long, greasy hair and a strange look in his eyes that made my skin crawl. It wasn't a normal look. It was hungry, like he was looking at a meal and trying to decide where to start. I took my lighter back and started walking away, much faster this time. The street I was on started to go up a steep hill, and I could feel myself getting out of breath. That's when I heard it. His slow, menacing walk had turned into a run. His footsteps were pounding on the pavement, coming up fast behind me. I knew I couldn't outrun him, especially not up this hill. I just kept walking, hoping he would just jog past me and disappear into the night. But he didn't. The next thing I knew, he had slammed into me from behind. One of his arms wrapped around my waist like a steel band, pinning my arms to my sides, and his other arm came around my neck. In that moment, something strange happened. The fear vanished, and it was replaced by a hot, boiling anger. How dare he? How dare he do this on my street, in my town? I knew we were on a residential street with houses all around us. I told him, my voice shaking but firm, that if he didn't let me go, I was going to scream as loud as I possibly could. At the same time, I started stomping on his feet with the heel of my boot, as hard as I could, over and over again. For a second, he hesitated. I could feel his grip loosen just a little. Then, he let me go. He didn't say a word. He just turned and jogged the rest of the way up the hill, vanishing behind a large hedge at the top. I immediately crossed the street, putting as much distance between myself and those bushes as possible. I walked the rest of the block with my eyes locked on that hedge, not daring to look away. When I reached the corner, I knew I was only 1 block from home. I broke into a full sprint and didn't stop until I was inside my house with the door locked behind me. I never told my parents what happened. I was afraid I'd get in trouble for smoking, and I wasn't sure they'd even believe me. It wasn't until years later that I understood how lucky I had been. I saw his picture in the newspaper. He was on trial for grabbing another girl a few weeks after my encounter, and he had beaten and assaulted her. I think I must have been his first attempt, and my fighting back scared him off. That night, it was the fight response that kicked in, not the freeze, and I am so incredibly thankful that it did. I was a very lucky kid, and I didn't even realize it. When I was 19, I moved from my hometown in northern Michigan all the way down to a small town called Pikeville, Kentucky. It was a quiet place with very little crime, and everyone was incredibly friendly. It was the kind of place that made you feel like you could trust people. That year, for my birthday, my family drove down to visit me. We made plans to meet up for breakfast at the local Hardee's the morning after they arrived. I've always been the type of person who shows up 15 minutes early for everything, and my family has always been the type to show up 20 minutes late. So I found myself standing outside the restaurant, just waiting. After a few minutes, a guy walked up and started talking to me. In a place like Pikeville, this wasn't unusual. Strangers made small talk all the time, so I didn't think anything of it. But looking back, all kinds of alarm bells should have been going off in my head. He seemed to know things about me. When he found out I was a student at the local college, he claimed he'd seen me at a party. This was impossible, as I was a quiet nerd who had never once been to a party. When I mentioned I liked video games, he immediately started talking about how he played Dungeons and Dragons all the time. He was trying to find common ground to make me feel comfortable. All while this was happening, he kept taking sips from a bottle of alcohol he had in a paper bag, and this was at 10 in the morning. He started telling me a sad story about how he had gotten into drugs and lost all of his friends. I felt a little bit sorry for him. My guard was down. The town felt safe, and this guy just seemed lonely. So when he asked if I wanted to go for a short walk while I waited for my family, I said yes. We walked and talked for maybe 10 minutes before I realized that the scenery had changed. We were no longer on the main street. We were in a rundown part of town I had never seen before. We stopped in front of a house that looked like it had been abandoned for years. The windows were boarded up, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. Next to the house was a dark, narrow, and incredibly sketchy-looking alley. The guy's friendly tone changed. He started talking about two girls he knew who supposedly lived in this abandoned house, and how they loved to party. He asked me if I wanted to meet them. It was at that exact moment that my common sense finally kicked in like an alarm. I was in a bad part of town with a sketchy guy who was drinking at 10 a.m. and talking about hard drugs. He wanted me to go into an obviously abandoned house with him, and no one in the world knew where I was. I immediately told him no, that my family was probably waiting for me and I had to get back. He looked annoyed. Then he tried a different tactic. He asked if I could help him move a pool table into his van, which he said was conveniently parked just down that dark alley. I declined again, and that's when his demeanor turned menacing. He started to reach into his jacket pocket. In that moment, all I could think was that this guy looked like he was about to stab me. I was terrified. Just then, my phone rang. It was my stepmom, calling to see where I was. It was the only kind thing she ever did for me. I used the call as an excuse and hastily walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. He followed me for 3 blocks before finally giving up. I don't know for sure what he wanted. Maybe it was just to rob me. But I later learned that area has a high number of disappearances and is known for human trafficking. All I could think of was that scene from Silence of the Lambs, where the killer lures a victim by asking for help loading something into his van. I don't know what would have happened if I had walked down that alley, but I'm glad I never had to find out. I grew up in a small town where, even if you didn't know everyone's name, you at least recognized their face. This happened about 15 years ago, when I was around 15 or 16 years old. It was a Saturday morning, and I was walking to my weekend sports practice. As I approached the street corner, I noticed an older man standing there, and he was staring directly at me. Back then, I was the kind of kid who smiled and waved at everyone, so I gave him a little wave as I passed. I stopped at the corner to wait for the light to change, and the man came and stood directly behind me. He was so close I could smell him, and I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. A knot of worry tightened in my stomach, but I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overreacting. When the light changed, I started walking, and I immediately heard his footsteps speed up behind me. He started mumbling something, trying to get my attention. I must have looked as terrified as I felt, because a woman who was walking on the same sidewalk suddenly appeared next to me. She looked at me, then glanced back at the man who was following us. She quietly asked if I knew him. I shook my head and told her I didn't. Without hesitating, she stayed in pace with me. We were passing in front of a local grocery store, and she gently guided me towards the entrance, telling me to come inside with her. The moment we were inside the store, the lady immediately went to an employee at the register and started explaining the situation. By this point, I was shaking with fear. I tried to hide behind some shoppers near the checkout lanes, but I could see the man who had been following me. He was standing outside the glass doors, staring right at me. He lifted his hand and slowly dragged his thumb across his throat in a slicing motion. I was completely paralyzed with fear. The people in the store saw what was happening. The employees and a few customers gathered around me, creating a small, protective circle to make me feel safe. I think that's when I finally broke down and started crying. A few minutes later, I saw police cars pull up outside. I watched as the officers talked to the man and then put him in handcuffs. I don't remember much after that. My parents came and picked me up, and we went to the police station. My dad actually worked as a police dispatcher in town, so he was able to find out what happened. He told me a few days later that the man had a history of mental health issues and had been off his medication. They had taken him to a local psychiatric hospital for treatment. I never saw that man again. And I also never saw the woman who saved me. I never even got the chance to thank her. She was a total stranger who saw a kid in trouble and decided to step in. I have no idea what would have happened if she hadn't been there that day. This took place back in 1999. I was an 18-year-old kid living in a very small town in Southern California, and my friends and I were experts at being bored. After dark, the only places open were a pharmacy, a few fast food joints, and a really gross bar. So we had to make our own fun. That usually meant just driving around, listening to the radio, and talking for hours. It was better than sitting at home. But one night that summer, a terrifying encounter made staying in our cozy, well-lit houses seem like a fantastic idea. My friend Shauna and I were out doing our usual loop, a route that took us through the main part of town behind the high school, and then back towards our neighborhood via the freeway. We had been driving for about an hour, and it was getting close to 11 p.m. when we decided to do one last loop before heading home. That's when we noticed a car with a few guys in it. We first saw them at a red light when they pulled up in the lane to our left. "That guy is checking you out," Shauna said to me. Sure enough, the passenger in the car next to us was staring over at me. I gave him a quick, polite smile, and when the light changed, I sped off. I wasn't really creeped out yet, just not interested in playing flirt tag with some random dudes. I kept my pace, but the car stayed a normal distance behind us. At the next light, they pulled up to our right. The driver gave Shauna a little nod, and she gave them a small wave. This continued for a few more blocks. At one stop sign, they even leaned out the window and motioned for us to follow them. We just waved goodbye and drove off, heading for the freeway entrance. I was hoping that would be the end of it, but as I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw their car do a U-turn and start following us onto the freeway. Now, something felt off. They stayed a few car lengths behind us, but they kept erratically switching lanes. Neither of us had a cell phone back then, so calling for help wasn't an option. We thought we had finally lost them after a few miles, but we were wrong. We exited the freeway to head home, and after a few minutes, I saw a car pull off the shoulder of the road and fall in right behind us. It was the same car. They had been waiting for us. They sped up and pulled alongside my car on the passenger side. The driver was gesturing angrily at us. Shauna started shouting that she didn't know what he wanted, making "I'm sorry" gestures with her hands. I was trying to keep my eyes on the road, but I kept glancing over, and then it happened. The driver pulled a gun out of his lap and started tapping it on the inside of his car window, pointing it at us. Shauna immediately threw her seat all the way back to hide. I looked over and saw the driver's face. It was twisted with absolute rage, and he was shouting so hard that I could see spit hitting his window. The gun was black and looked terrifyingly real. At the same time, their passenger pulled out what looked like a crowbar and started waving it out his window. My mind went into overdrive. I knew there was a fire station a few exits down. I told Shauna my plan, floored the gas pedal, and tried to outrun them. I managed to get some distance, but they caught up again. The exit was approaching. I swerved off the freeway, and I could hear them pass overhead. I thought we were safe, but then I saw them tearing down the exit ramp behind us. They must have done a U-turn on the freeway and driven the wrong way to catch us. I ran a red light, hoping a cop would see me, but there was no such luck. They were only a block behind us. I was driving as fast as I could when, by some miracle, the car behind us lost control. They swerved violently, crashed into a mailbox on the sidewalk, and came to a screeching halt. I saw the driver get out of the car as I was speeding away, and I almost cried with relief. But it wasn't over. As we were driving off, we heard a gunshot. Shauna sat up and looked back. She said she saw the driver standing in front of his car, aiming the gun in our direction. Then we heard a second shot. We made it to the fire station, and in another stroke of luck, there were 3 police cruisers parked outside. I pulled over, stumbled out of the car, and told them my story, vomiting halfway through from the sheer terror and adrenaline. The cops were amazing. They immediately went to look for the guys, though they never caught them. The car and the plates had been stolen. I don't know what those guys wanted that night, but I know it was nothing good. I grew up in a small town where people felt so safe that they didn't even lock their doors. When I was 14, I did a lot of babysitting, and one of my regular families had 3 young daughters. This happened one night in December. The parents were going to a Christmas work party, and I arrived and went over the usual routine with the mom, Helen. She mentioned that the TV in the upstairs living room was broken, so once the girls were asleep, I should just watch TV in the downstairs family room. After playing with the girls for a while, I got them all into bed and headed downstairs as instructed. I spent a few hours watching TV. I was a night owl, and Helen knew she could stay out super late when I was babysitting, sometimes until 3 in the morning. Around 1:30 a.m., I remember picking up the phone to call my mom and let her know I'd be late. But as I was dialing, I heard the front door upstairs open. I was a little surprised, as it was earlier than I expected them. As I headed up the stairs from the basement, I heard someone stumble heavily, followed by a muffled laugh. I picked up my pace, worried that Helen was drunk and had fallen. But when I got to the top of the stairs, I didn't see Helen. I saw 3 people I had never seen before in my life. There was a woman who was clearly very drunk, leaning against the doorframe, and 2 men standing in the entryway. They looked just as surprised to see me as I was to see them. I asked them what they were doing there. The woman slurred out something about being there for the party. Confused, I asked if they knew Helen, the mother who lived there. One of the men ignored my question. He just looked me up and down, a strange look on his face, and asked, "Are you here alone?" The question sent a chill down my spine. I didn't want to answer him. All I could think about were the 3 little girls sleeping soundly in their beds just down the hall. Instead of answering, I told them that there was no party here and that they needed to leave. The man who had asked the question just smirked and took a step forward into the house. This time, I demanded that they leave. As I said it, we all heard the soft beep of a phone button being pushed. I had completely forgotten that I was still holding the cordless phone in my hand, and my nervous grip must have pressed a button by accident. But the man didn't know that. He seemed to think I had done it on purpose, that I was calling the police. The look on his face changed instantly from arrogance to alarm. He quickly told the other guy that they were leaving, and they helped the drunk woman up. The moment they were outside, I slammed the door and locked the deadbolt. I ran to the front window and watched them. They didn't go to another house on the street. They just continued walking up the block until they disappeared into the darkness. It wasn't a case of them just getting the wrong address. The mom came home 2 hours later and was confused about why the door was locked. She was too drunk to have a serious conversation, so I just told her it made me feel safer. I still feel stupid for not telling her or anyone else what really happened. They didn't actually do anything, so I felt like no one would believe me. But I can't shake the feeling that if I hadn't been accidentally holding that phone, that night could have ended very, very differently.